Welcome on in to episode 16 of the Your Take podcast. I'm joined by Scott Levine. We're here talking Clippers Nuggets Game 7, as well as talking about the rest of the Western Conference and Eastern Conference semifinals and previewing the Celtics and Miami Heat Eastern Conference Final Series that will start today. So we'll get to all of that in just a second. But first, Scott, do you want to introduce yourself to the Your Take fans?
What's up, everybody? I'm Scott, born and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm a huge Pacers fan. Shout out to my boys at Butler University and also Syracuse basketball. I love them. Favorite player has got to be Kareem. I love Kareem, man. I've actually met him in person. One of my biggest regrets was what I said to him. All I could cough up was, "Wow, you're tall," and that's me.
How old were you when you saw Kareem? I didn't know you met him.
I did meet him. I think I met him. I was in middle school. Got his autograph. He signed a Hall of Fame pennant for me with his name and the year he made the Hall of Fame. He was a really nice guy. I just couldn't believe starstruck.
How
Unreal.
much how much how much Lakers 1970s 80s basketball have you watched with Kareem? Have you seen a lot of his games to crown him your favorite player of all time?
Well, during quarantine, I watched a lot of old games, but no, you are right. They don't really air that. They don't air them that much. But just from a character standpoint and seeing highlights of him, um, or even just seeing him in the movie Airplane, just seems like a great guy who's really fighting for what he believes in, and the stats show it all as
Not
well
to put
on
you
the
on the
court.
spot, but if I were to ask you where you'd rank Kareem all time, you don't have the exact number. Like, what range would you put him in?
Oh, he's definitely in the top 10.
I mean, I haven't,
I don't
I
really.
haven't, I have him third personally behind MJ, LeBron, but you know, top 10. I think it's a little you're too broad of a range, but it's okay. All right,
I don't like to get into the nitty ditty details of that because just the different eras are hard to compare.
for sure. All right, before we jump into this Clippers Nuggets Game 7 that we're going to see tonight, let's talk about what has stood out to you. I know you've been watching a lot of the games in the bubble. We've all had so much time on our hands with quarantine and everything the last couple months. What has stood out to you the most so far from watching all the games?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, there's two things that I feel have, really stood out since we've been watching these games. The first one is the fouls. There have been an exceedingly more amount of fouls in the bubble, and there's statistics behind it. The fouls per game have gone up around 4.5, with the most differential in shooting fouls, which we have seen a lot on the 3-point shooters, and then also a lot of offensive fouls have been called.
No, I
This,
definitely agree. When I was watching fouls, especially like in the regular season portion, I think it maybe is not as excessive in the playoffs, but when we had the regular season games going on in the bubble, I mean that first week of games, like the foul rates were crazy. The number of free throws teams were taking was people were taking like 40, 50 free throws a game, and it was really just games were
mhm.
taking so long. And even in the playoffs now, I think the number of total fouls has gone down, but we've seen a ton of fouls, especially late in games. It almost seems like I've been really deciding who's been winning. Especially, I know there was that Heat Bucks game where they called the foul on Chris Middleton and then called the foul on I forget who was shooting at the end of it for the Heat, but again, Jimmy
Butler.
Butler, yeah, two late foul calls at the very end of games that like. There's other examples too. There's been missed foul calls. There's been a lot of like those 2 minute reports coming out saying that there were missed fouls that should have gone one way or the other. But man, it's kind of annoying. There's been one blip. The NBA's done a fantastic job with the bubble in general with these games. But I guess the one blip would be it seems that refs have been deciding a lot more games than I wish that we were seeing. So what was your second thing that you wanted to bring up real quick?
Well, just quickly to
Yeah,
touch on that, on the fouls was the foul on Jimmy Butler was a makeup call because they knew Goran did not foul
yeah.
Chris, so they were just trying to even it out and just see who can make the free throws. But I just know Van Gundy he wants to give text to everybody that's doing the finger scroll. Because I love the ability to review because they have panned out well, and coaches can use them strategically. But the players need to understand you only get one of them. You can't just review everything. Like take it easy. Just play the game. Don't foul. The second thing I was going to mention is I think the NBA should really consider going for a shortened season from here on out. 82 games, it's like you don't want it to be baseball where the games aren't as important. When we see here in the bubble, every single game mattered for any team. Even if the Lakers had already clinched their playoff spot or clinched the number one seed, they were still trying to maneuver their last few games because it could determine who one of their other opponents were playing. When you have a shortened season, that means that the differential in between your seedings becomes a lot shorter, and also those teams fighting for that ace spot. So that also could be a way to curb tanking for some teams as
I
well.
also think, just jumping off of that real quick, it also could possibly lessen a lot of the load management that we see in the NBA. I mean, I know for me personally, it does suck, especially when you actually are going to a game in person. I know a few years back I was going to see a Sixers Spurs game, and I had never seen Kawhi play before in person, and I was looking forward to seeing Tim Duncan, and I get to the game and it's Kawhi sitting, Duncan sitting, Ginobili sitting,
Yeah.
Parker sitting. I'm like, why am I coming to the Six? It was also when the Sixers were still really bad, so I was like, why am I coming to a Sixers Spurs game when the Spurs don't have any of the players that I want to come see play? So that was definitely frustrating. Your second
Hmm.
point, or going back to your Stan Van Gundy point, dude, I've been hating. They've been reviewing everything in the bubble. It's kind of gotten really annoying at times. The last 2 minutes of games I feel like have gotten even longer than what we used to see, and they got to cut down the reviews, make them a little bit quicker somehow. Well, let's jump into this Clippers Nuggets because it's super interesting. I really thought when it was 3-1 Clippers, series was over. I did not see the Nuggets storming back, taking the next two games. It's been really, really, really shocking. I think some interesting points of note. The Clippers offensively have gone through really long droughts in the second half of both Game 5 and Game 6 that ultimately is what cost them the game. Looking at Game 5 specifically, Clippers had a nice little lead in the fourth quarter, and the Clippers scored 8 points total in the first 6 minutes of the fourth quarter, which let the Nuggets go from this 8-point deficit. They tied the game up quickly, and then it was close at the end, and the Nuggets wound up making the plays down the stretch to win. Game 6 even, the Clippers scored 6 points over the last 8.5 minutes of the third quarter, and all of a sudden their 17-point lead that they had at one point in the second half just evaporated. And these really long stretches of the Clippers offense just going to sleep. It seems to be that when Kawhi comes off the floor, PG makes his shots, but just in general, like the other guys around Kawhi and PG are just have not been stepping up, have not been contributing. Game 5, outside of Kawhi and Paul George, the rest of the team shot 37% from the floor. Game 6, outside of Kawhi and Paul George, they shot 38% from the floor, everyone else. And especially for me, like I thought one of the biggest X factors for the Clippers was Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell. Those guys are each averaging 18 points a game during the regular season. There's a reason that they were both top three in Sixth Man of the Year voting. But Game 5, Lou and Harrell go 5 for 17, scoring only 10 points combined. Game 6, they score only 19 points combined. They're not even giving us close to the 36 points per game that they were averaging together in the regular season. And it's making Kawhi and PG just have to carry the load a lot more. PG has stepped up from that opening series. He's looked a lot better, but making his shots. I think score almost 20, I think at least 20 points almost every single game except for one in this whole series. But everyone else has just, I thought the Clippers were one of the deepest teams in the league. I really liked Lou and Harrell off the bench, and we just haven't seen it from them, especially in these last two games. And these long offensive droughts have been killing the Clippers.
Yeah, Benj, I completely agree. That is one thing that stood out when I was, looking up the rosters a few weeks ago of the Clippers. I was like, they're kind of deep, but um, if you look at their win shares, it is, nicely distributed. However, except for Kawhi's at 2.6, whereas Morris is the next second highest at 1.2. Now, 1.2 win shares is, that's pretty significant for a single player. And it even gets better, 1.9 for the third and fourth guys, something around there, as opposed to a team like Denver, who solely relies on the 1.5 and 1.9 win shares of Jokic and Murray. So they are a little bit more distributed, but I do agree maybe that just doesn't account for this series specifically because you can see that there's just not a lot of big man help. Harrell is not performing like he should, and neither is Zubac.
Yeah, there was one game. I think it was Game 3 or Game 4. One of those Clippers wins where it was a really close game. The Nuggets were up two. Jokic checked into the game and he scored 4 points over the last 7 minutes. And Zubac and Harold did a fantastic job on covering him. And then the Clippers wound up winning that game. And I think the other thing that's really been for me is it was really noticeable when I was looking back at some of the highlights from Games 5 and 6. The defense that that the Clippers were playing on Jamal Murray through the first four games of the series is just so much less intense in Games 5 and 6. what we saw early on in the series. The Jamal Murray Nikola Jokic two-man game, especially in these last two games, has just been absolutely destroying the Clippers. Jamal Murray, he's getting all these favorable switches. When he gets Pat Bev switched off of him, when he gets Kawhi Leonard switched off of him, he's going to town. He's getting into the lane. He's hitting step back threes, and no one's able to keep up with him. He's gotten Zubac and Montrezl Harrell switched on to him. He's gotten Marcus Morris switched on him. Even Paul George is not fast enough to keep up with Jamal Murray. And these switches have been what's been all of a sudden allowing Jamal Murray to have such a huge impact in these last two games. And if the Clippers are going to want to win Game 7, they got to make sure Pat Bev is on him at all times, or Kawhi Leonard's on him at all times. These switches have been killing them. And the second big thing that I've been seeing is Nikola Jokic. Obviously, his inside game is fantastic, and he's got amazing touch around the rim. But when Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic have been running little pick and rolls, Jokic, especially when they're doing when Jokic picks and pops and doesn't roll, they're making the Clippers pay for doubling Jamal Murray. Jokic kind of keeps floating out to the 3-point line, and they're not covering him. They're trying to make sure that Jamal Murray doesn't get to the rim, and eventually they find the ball back to Jokic, and Jokic has been hitting his wide open threes that keep coming from these pick and pop situations. And the Clippers got to do a really much better job at defending that. And just in general, the Clippers are paying for their double teams. They've been trying to double Jokic. They've been trying to double Murray. They've been trying to keep guys out of the paint. And, man, the Nuggets have been doing a fantastic job. Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic are two of the best passers in the league anyway, especially Jokic is the best passing big man we've possibly ever seen. And those two guys have been finding the open man every single time. The Clippers have been trying to double in these last two games, and the Nuggets shooters have been making their shots. Paul Millsap went for 17 in Game 5. Gary Harris went for 16 in Game 6. And those third guys outside of Jokic and Murray stepping up has really made a big difference. I know even Michael Porter Jr. had a nice game in Game 6. He had 13 points and only 7 shots. So when these other guys on the Nuggets are making their shots, especially off the doubles, they're really putting a lot of pressure on the Clippers. And suddenly, I mean, I think if the Clippers are going to win, they're going to have to rely on their guys to be in isolation defensively. And you can't be doubling Jokic and Murray as much as they've been doing, because as we've been seeing, the Clippers have been paying for these doubles.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I'll just add some more stuff to really beef up your argument, because I think we're really on the same page here. When you speak about Murray just being unstoppable, right? Well, Pat Bev, like, this is supposed to be the guy. This is supposed to be the guy that can defend the guards. Well, Pat Bev averages, I think, 4.3 fouls in the playoffs this year. Like, dude, you're on minutes restrictions. Not only that, you're getting technicals. He's all over the place. Like, how can you be the best defender if you're not in the game because you're just fouling every time, right? Also, bringing up the screen and roll, you don't normally see that. You usually just see like a really strong center or power forward with an all-star guard, right? But this is rare, where we actually have two all-star caliber players who are interacting in the pick and roll. I wouldn't, compare Vucevic to Jokic, but I mean, even him in the pick and roll with Fultz, like, we're just nailing threes. When you can have the big guy also be a star in the pick and roll, that's just deadly, especially these foreign players. They can hit the threes. And then lastly, just to, they're getting these shots because in games 5 and 6, the Nuggets bench they finally decided to show up, right? So I just found an interesting correlation in Game 5 and in Game 6. The third, fourth, and fifth scorer for the Nuggets, which comprised of Porter, Monte Morris, Grant, etc. Each of those games, third, fourth, and fifth scorers combined for 39 points. And that was on 50% shooting. Now, they don't, whether it's 30 points or 45 points or 25, whatever it may be, when you're shooting at 50%, the efficiency is just killer. At that point in time, when you're shooting that well, you have to guard them. Paul George and Kawhi can't step in. They can't have that help defense. So just to beef up your argument there,
Yeah, and
I guess if the Nuggets put up 40 points, like that, their third, fourth, and fifth can combine for 40 points, that could really do
that's
some
really
damage.
interesting. It also just goes to show, you said their third, fourth, fifth guys are shooting 50%, and like I said earlier, outside of Kawhi and PG, everyone else in the Clippers has shot 37% in Game 5 and 38% in Game 6. So the Nuggets bench has been what's been driving these last two wins, and where this 3-1 comeback is suddenly coming from, and really giving the Nuggets, or giving the Clippers a run for their money. Be really interesting to see how Game 7 pans out. When I'm thinking about who I think is going to win Game 7, I mean, we've seen the Nuggets play really well the last two games, but at the end of the day, I just have to go with the Clippers. I think you see the huge drought. You see the huge droughts the Clippers have had in the last two games. I think those are fixable mistakes. I think Kawhi might have to play 45 minutes in this game 7 if they're going to pull it out. But when Kawhi's been on the floor, the Clippers' efficiency has been a lot better. The Nuggets have not been going on these huge runs. The Clippers' offense has not looked so dead. Kawhi's been in these game 7 moments before, and he's been balling this series. I think he had one bad game. I think it was the one game that the Nuggets stole, game 2. But outside of that, every other game in the playoffs, Kawhi's been lights out. He's been a machine, and I think that he's going to step up. I think they're going to have to put him on Jamal Murray a little more than they would like to. But I think that that's what it's going to take for the Clippers. I ultimately think the Clippers are going to get it done. It's just really hard for me to see them losing this game. What do you think? Who do you have winning this one?
You know, I mean, I'm rooting for the Nuggets, and I genuinely do think that the Nuggets will win. One reason being Paul George is playing so great, it's got to come to an end. I mean, he's not the type of player to just put up 30 points every single night. Um, I think, Michael Porter, we saw it in the post game conference, and we saw it all over Twitter, calling out the coach and the team for not distributing the ball enough. And sure enough, that's what they did. Game 5 and 6. I think they found out, when Porter and Murray are on the floor, they're plus 11 in points together as a two-man combo. So I really do think that it's possible that they pull it off. I'm I'm rooting for Millsap. He's the X factor. He's a 4-time All-Star. He theoretically has as much accolades as some of those guys on the floor. If he shows up, if he gets, it's over. It's over. I do think that the Nuggets are going to pull it out. What's stopping them? They've already had a Game 7 situation with the Jazz, right? Whereas the Clippers are just sliding by, barely beating the Mavericks. So I'm going to give it to them. I don't think that the Clippers have enough leadership. I don't think that they really have the will and desire. Kawhi is just too quiet.
I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I think when you're talking about how you talk about Paul George has been playing much better than you'd expect, scoring a lot more points. I think when you look at everyone outside of Jokic and Murray compared to if you take off Jokic and Murray, take off Kawhi and Paul George, it's really been the Nuggets who have been exceeding expectations. All of their guys are making their shots. The Clippers have been going through these really cold stretches, and I feel like just bound to regress. We're bound to see what we saw in the regular season come out in especially a Game 7. Lou Williams, I think, is going to bring it. Montrezl Harrell is going to bring it, and I think that ultimately that's going to be what the difference is. I think we know Jokic and Murray are going to have a good game. We know Paul George and Kawhi Leonard are going to have good games, and it's whichever guys on the bench can make the most shots, make the most timely shots, and really take the most pressure off of the team superstars is going to be what's going to get it done. Do you have any final thoughts on this?
I guess one final thought is my man Gary Harris from Indianapolis as well. We haven't said his name yet, and I think
I
him
mentioned
not
him.
playing.
I mentioned his 16 points in Game 6.
It's just him not playing in those regular season games. Right, he just came along. He wasn't even in most of the Jazz series, was he?
No, he didn't. He played the last two games of that series.
Right. He
He helps their
he
defense a ton.
he
He's like you look at the defensive rating.
he spreads the
Yeah,
floor
when you look
too.
at defensive rating, he has the third highest defensive rating of any player on the Nuggets this year. And Will Barton's
Yeah,
out, so out of current players, he has the second highest defensive rating because Will Barton was number 1.
yeah. I mean, Gary and Murray used to be a tandem duo before this whole bubble started. Like it was those two, the
Yeah.
McCollum Lillard type deal. Just imagine if he stepped up. I guess to your point, it's bench versus bench, right? They each got two stars. Who's going to bring it? I think that the Nuggets just have surprisingly now. I mean, I don't want to doubt Lou Will and all, but I think just the accolades on the other side of the team, just more reliable players, and they're not goofing around out there. Like they're ready to
I don't
go.
really know if I would agree with you that the Nuggets are more reliable players. I mean, you look at what Kawhi did last year with the Raptors. I mean, Paul George, you're a Pacers fan. You know what Paul George took the Pacers so close to so many finals appearances. Lou
Exactly.
Williams and Montrezl Harrell are both like six men of the year. They honestly they have more experience than what the Nuggets have. They have the guys who have been there before more than the Nuggets have. So you're talking about if that's the argument you're trying to make. I mean, I think all that leans more towards the Clippers than the Nuggets, but that's besides the
Well,
point.
look, I said I said they have to have the third, fourth, and fifth guy have to
Okay.
be score around 40 points, right? Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is that if we're looking at the Clippers per se, you could Lou Will and
It's Lou Will, Montrezl
Montrez.
Harrell, and Marcus Morris versus Gary Harris, Michael Porter Jr., and probably Monte Morris is what I'd probably put it down to.
And this is what I'm saying. You're forgetting about my man Millsap. Don't count Grant out for another 8 to 10 points right there. Torrey Craig's gonna come in and shoot 3 for 4, 3 for 5, and make have a solid six
I mean, I could bring
points.
up guys
Like
on the Clippers bench who have chipped in 6 to 10 points at different points throughout the series too.
no, but you
Jamichael
couldn't.
Green has
But you
chipped.
couldn't.
Jamichael Green has made some big shots for them. Pat Bev has had 6 to 10 points. Pat Bev gives you 10, which he's done a couple games in the series. I mean, we could go back and forth naming guys who could give us 10 points all day.
We
But at the end,
could. We
but I
could.
think ultimately it's going to come down to those. It's going to come down, I think, to Harris, Millsap, or Morris and Porter, and then Harrell Williams and Marcus Morris for the Clippers. And ultimately, who's going to make the big shots down the stretch? It's going to be. We saw Kawhi do it before. We saw Jokic do it in the Jazz series. So who's going to do it? Who's going to do it this time around? So it'd be fantastic. I'm really excited for that game
We will
tomorrow. We will
see.
see. So I have Clippers taking Game 7. Scott has Nuggets. Coming up in just a second, we're going to be talking about Miami Heat versus Boston Celtics, Eastern Conference Finals preview. So stick around. That is coming up in right after this.